Welcome to the Master Applied Finance information session for Term 2. My name is Guy Schofield. I'm the course director for the Master of Applied Finance at Macquarie Business School. I'd like to start this evening to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I would also like to thank alumni speakers who've come to join us tonight, Kate Kitchener and James Waddell, which we'll hear from later on in this evening. So welcome, Kate, and welcome, James. So today I will look to answer 4 key questions. I'd like to talk about why get applied finance, why study with Macquarie, what to expect, and then we'll have time at the end of today's session to have a fairly free format covering other questions. If we don't get through all the questions, we will also have some material that we'll send out at the end. The slides and material from tonight, including the recording, will be available to people who've registered for the session. So let me start off by talking to the topic of why get applied finance. So interestingly, when we talk to people about what they think of when we talk about finance, over the years, I think I have detected that a change in the perspective of finance. Finance is now getting taught increasingly in high school and undergraduate studies, and most people see sort of the very highly quantitative, theoretical side of finance. Finance is fun is an interesting one, which I don't always hear. Finance is crucial, which is one I do hopefully will come across in tonight's session. Finance is the lifeblood of business. Hopefully we'll cover that tonight. And finance is cool. I'm not sure how well I'll go in making that prospect come to life tonight. But certainly finance and the most tangible aspect of finance, which for many people come across as money, is changing. Finance is changing, money is changing, and we all have to change with it. And so in this graph, we can see that cash and transactions per capita have come down since 2005 quite dramatically. And you can see that debit and credit cards have become a lot more popular. So we're moving more towards a cashless transaction-based. And it's these sort of changes which we can see, which make finance so interesting. We also see that financial system continues to change and adapt with those changes. So you can see that whilst we think about finance as being a very tangible thing, but it's actually something which we come across in our day-to-day life. It affects us as contractors or employees, and increasingly people who were employees are now becoming contractors. Banks, which were a big part of society, are now starting to see private equity funds and superannuation funds as being big keepers of money. And we're seeing companies changing from being very asset rich to very many of them being services and intellectual property. So there is huge changes going on in the financial system. And what I hope to get across and why I think it's important to get finance is that it's not just an isolated thing that someone does in a bank. It's across every aspect of someone's work. And so if you've got expertise and you've got finance, applied finance, and you can critically apply the finance, you could be in demand in a whole range of areas as shown in this diagram, right from strategy and planning, finance and procurement, project organization, operations and maintenance, and asset recycling. So to get finance, and I'm not talking about being an accountant here, I'm talking about getting finance, you can be in all areas of business. We've got people who finish the qualification and stay in a very numerate area, and some of them move on to more general management areas. But the point about getting finance is that you've got the skills to interpret the market and interpret information, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So finance we see in more obvious areas. So certainly in Australia, Australia's got a huge investment in infrastructure, and lots of questions get asked, especially if you're in the public-private partnerships. And so having people who are able to understand risk and return and ask the right questions are in obvious demand. In other areas, perhaps less obvious, in social change and impact investing, finance, again, is important. Sustainable finance is an elective, and I'll talk more about that. And that, again, is a critical area for people with finance skills. And then the ongoing changes in artificial intelligence and Internet of Things creates challenges and opportunities for finance executives. And this is one of my examples that I do like. It can be that you can use satellite images, but data is becoming so prevalent, and the ability to disentangle data and create insights from data, I think, is one of the ever interesting challenges that people in finance face. So it's not only having the data, it's also trying to interpret and create insight from that data. So here's an example. If you've got a lot of oil rigs sitting in a firth in Scotland, near Invergordon, you could perhaps say, well, that's a parking lot. You've got a lot of people who've got oil rigs not out there, and then maybe you can actually use that to give you some information about what the demand is for oil, or at least the demand for oil in the North Sea. So big changes there. Also, and as I keep on saying to my students, it's not just thinking about the returns. If I offered you a 20% return versus a 10% return, it doesn't necessarily mean the 20% return is more attractive. You need to also then think about the risk. And so understanding the risks and the rules are critically important, and trying to infer what those kind of responses might be. And that's one of the things when I say applied finance, I'm thinking about critically applying the various theories to be able to come up and make a contribution. And with that in mind, what we can think about is one of the areas which we're seeing a huge growth in is ESG. One of the most important investment trends. And to me, what we're seeing here is what used to be what economists call an externality. We're seeing those externalities trying to get priced into the market. And so we are very fortunate in Macquarie that we have a very vibrant research network, and we have and indeed we have a research paper that's just come out, which is looking at the subject of greenwashing and whitewashing. And what we're seeing from this paper, we'll have a webinar where people can come and listen. And it's something that we offer to the alumni, is a regular period of really regular sessions so that people can keep up to date. So when we're talking to people who are doing the Master of Applied Finance, we hope people will become part of a vibrant alumni, and we carry on a big conversation about society and finance. So that's an example of a change and how you could hope to keep in connection. So we do have a huge network, which I'll talk about in a moment. So asking the right questions is a big thing that we labor on the Master of Applied Finance. So, there's no doubt a whole range of textbooks you can get, which will give you a whole lot of theory. But what you'll get from our sessions is an industry expert who will be asking you to explain your point of view. What's your evidence? What's an alternative point of view? The exciting thing about finance, there's never a single answer. There's always different perspectives. But if you don't ask the right questions, you could end up with a business that doesn't survive. So in summary, for this part of my chat, I want to say the reason why I think you need to get applied finance is that it will give you superior technical skills to examine, interpret, and appraise financial information and market conditions. But one thing which we do see time and time again from people who are often surprised about this is that they also get soft skills. So whilst I do labor the technical component of Master Applied Finance associated courses, we do have a very large emphasis on the soft skills, including teaming and communicating. So it's no point in just having the technical skills if you can't communicate that and explain it, and if you can't ask other people questions about what they're presenting. So that's why I get applied finance. Moving on apace to why study with Macquarie. Let me just say that it is it's a course which is about real world finance. it's delivered by industry experts. And I think that sets Macquarie apart. And one of my big roles as course director is to spend a lot of time making sure that we have people who are in the industry, who are current in industry practice, who can talk to people about the theory and also the application and the practice. So we've got a huge alumni across a large number of countries. And you can see from this slide that we are top 100 in the top 100 in the world. And in Asia, we're the #1 in Asia in terms of Master Applied Finance. So that's all because we focus really on real world finance delivered by industry experts. And if you go to an employer and say that you've got a Macquarie Master Applied Finance, you'll find that you'll more often than not, you'll be coming across a member who's an alumni who will have been familiar with Master Applied Finance, and they recognize the value and the expertise that you can bring to bear. So other reasons of why, why Macquarie, as I mentioned, taught by industry experts. So we talk about the discipline context. So we will revisit some of the theories, the models and tools, but then we think about how those tools are used or perhaps not used in practice. And if they're not used, why they're not used. I mean, part of the thing for me in theory is to try and understand the assumptions behind theories. And very often the theories are great to a point. They're an approximation, but knowing the assumptions behind theories allows you to go a lot further with them, because then you know when not to use them, or you know where their limitations are. So why might they not be used? And in terms of application, when might they not be used? So those are the sort of color and richness that we hope that people will get from the Master Applied Finance by talking to industry practitioners. It's co-designed. Our courses are co-designed with industry. We have career services, and we aim to focus on producing in-demand graduates. And you can see that by the rankings that are shown on the screen here. We also have a very vibrant community with the industry. We've got a great deal of partnerships, and you can see on this slide the range of the associations which we're involved with. Association of Financial Markets in Australia, CAIA, the Alternative Investment Association, and many of these will recognize your Master Applied Finance in satisfaction of their educational pathway requirements. So that's something to check up on in more detail. And I'll talk to more on this in this session today. We may not get all of your detailed questions about, well, what could you be recognition of prior learning, or what entitlements might you get, but we're more than happy. I'll put a link up. So if you've got any further questions coming out of this session today, we can either arrange to communicate via email, or I can carry on with a one-on-one interview if you wish to. So let me move on just to other points about why Macquarie. It's tailored to your needs both now and in the future. So if you look at this diagram, taking it from the top, if you are somebody who's a non-finance person and you require finance skills and knowledge, you can enter at graduate certificate of finance level. If you've got some basic competency in finance, but you want some specific practical details, we then offer the graduate diploma. So you can get 40 credit points, then you can move on to a graduate diploma for another 40 credit points. And then if you want to then secure perhaps a more senior role, we then have the Master of Applied Finance. And so depending on your prior experience, you could apply for recognition of prior learning and come in through an 80 credit point entry point, for example. So the graduate certificate of finance could be an RPL, or what we call recognition of prior learning. But in many ways, I do encourage people not to rush and to actually enjoy the full journey. It's amazing how many times it's a bit like reading a book. You might read a book once and think you've got the story, but rereading it, you suddenly find a whole range of other stories and experiences to it. So there is a journey. It is tailored to your needs now and in the future, and you can be assured if you want to start off on the graduate certificate and see how you go, you can do that, and then the award you get there will give you an entry into the graduate diploma of applied finance. So it is tailored to your needs. So I've done a lot of talking now. So what I'm going to do is to ask Kate to give us a few words and introduce herself and talk a little bit about her experience. As you can see, Kate is a current Master of Applied Finance student. So Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Guy. So hello, everyone. My name is Kate Kitchener. As Guy said, I'm a current Master of Applied Finance student. I'm doing one subject this term, and then next term, one more subject, and hopefully after that, I'll get to graduate. But I'm here tonight to just share some of my thoughts around, Macquarie Business School and the student experience that I've had, and hopefully that will help you make your decision. So I wanted to kick off by maybe sharing a bit around my background, both educational and in terms of work. Right now I'm working at AMP Bank as a product owner within the everyday banking and payments space. Before AMP Bank, I was actually living and working in London, where I worked in a few different industries, actually. My last role before returning to Australia was working at the Financial Times of London, so the newspaper. So that was quite a different one. But prior to going to London, I worked for many years at the Commonwealth Bank. And in terms of my study background, I probably had like a less traditional path to the masters than what most people would have. When I finished high school, I actually could not decide what I wanted to do at university. I was just, overwhelmed by the choice, and I thought I'd take a gap year. And I went to high school in New Zealand. So during that gap year, I moved over to Australia, and that's when I started working for the CBA. And I actually started off right at the very bottom, as far at the bottom as you could probably get. So my first role at the CBA was in their mailroom there. And I worked my way up through different roles. So obviously my gap year turned into several years. And during this time, I sort of thought, in terms of my career, if I want to be going places, I'm going to have to do some sort of higher education. So I did a little bit of study with Kaplan Professional, and then I eventually ended up enrolling in a bachelor's degree, which I completed part-time while I was working. So it probably took me close to 10 years to finish that bachelor's degree. I think I only graduated in 2017 or 2018, so relatively recently. And it was at that point where, I'd been working on my career for a few years. I'd just finished my bachelor's. And, the thing was, what am I going to do next? If I want my career to progress further, I'm going to have to continue on with studying. So I looked at a few different courses. I looked at master's degrees, and, I wasn't sure whether, my bachelor's degree, which I'd done online, whether that would be, considered well enough to get a direct entry into a master's. So I looked at graduate sort of diplomas, and I also looked at the CFA program. And I did the first level of the CFA program, but what I found with that, and what eventually led me into applying for the masters, was I found that you really miss out on the networking that you get with the masters. My undergraduate being online study was a lot of spending time by myself. It was a very different online experience to what you get today. And the CFA, likewise, was a lot of time, spent by myself, rote learning for this one exam. So when looking at the masters, the Macquarie Business School was really attractive because their campus is right there in the city. When I started anyway, we were going to the campus and doing face-to-face lectures. So it was a good opportunity to meet with the other students and build up those networks that, I missed out on in undergraduate and you don't necessarily get with the CFA. So Macquarie was a really attractive choice. And The other thing that I really liked about it was that it was applied knowledge. So, in the CFA, we'd learn about, say, you're managing risk, and perhaps you can do scenario analysis, or perhaps you can do a Monte Carlo to predict outcomes. But in this master's program, Master of Applied Finance, you actually get to build that model in Excel. You get to build the Monte Carlo model, which I think is more powerful for your learning than just learning about, in theory, how you could apply a model like that. So I also wanted to touch on, obviously, the COVID experience and the switch that we've had to online learning. You're probably thinking, oh, you did your undergraduate online, you must be a pro at online learning. I would say that, with Macquarie Business School, the experience has been a lot different to what I experienced in my undergraduate. In my undergraduate, it was a lot of, we either didn't get recorded lectures, or there'd just sort of be a dodgy video camera set up at the back of a lecture hall where the on-campus students' lecture was taking place. But with Macquarie, we actually get Zoom lectures that the lecture dials into. There's a lot of, discussion amongst the group. Usually the groups are quite small in the classes. So it might be 20 students, it might be 30 students, but there's still a lot of opportunity to take part in those and discuss and share your experiences, which I found really great. So, when I was concerned with the move online that, that networking that I was looking for, the opportunity wouldn't be there. But I've actually found the opposite, that there's still a huge amount of opportunity to connect with the other students. And I think with that flexibility, it's perhaps even better, because now in the classes, there are students who would have in the past gone to the Melbourne campus. So we're connecting with students outside of Sydney itself. One thing I found more of a challenge with the switch to online was the change in exam format. We're probably all used to where you turn up at the campus or the exam hall with your pencil and paper and do a written exam. And perhaps you get a formula sheet, or perhaps you have to memorize them. But with the switch to online learning, the exam format has changed quite a bit. So one of the last ones that I did, rather than providing a written response online, you actually recorded 2 videos of you answering the question and uploaded those. So, when I first saw that was the exam format, I thought, oh my goodness, I just don't want to record a video, how mortifying. But actually, in doing it, it was really good, and quite a lot easier, I think, to sometimes share your thoughts verbally rather than having to frantically write or type everything in the time frame. Yes, the other things I wanted to touch on about the student experience is that I found, with the Master of Applied Finance, there's students from a whole range of different backgrounds. So, I work in banking, but you have students who come from the superannuation industry. I've got a student that I'm working with this term who comes from like a biotech industry, which is really different. So, there's a whole range of different experiences. People are at different points in their career. Some people are quite new to their professional lives, and some people have been in the industry for a lot longer. And it's been really great to get that diversity of perspectives. There's been a few subjects that I've done where we've got to do group assignments, and obviously a lot of those meetings are held over Zoom, especially with students being in different locations. So there's been that opportunity to build those networks and connections with the other students. One of the things I wanted to touch on was whether to pick one subject per semester or 2 subjects per semester. In my experience, I've only ever done one subject. There's 4 terms per year at the Macquarie Business School. So doing one subject, you can finish in 2 years. Now, I've taken longer than 2 years because I haven't done one subject every term. And my view is that 2 subjects would be quite a lot to take on, especially if you were working at the same time. And from conversations I've had with other students, they have, felt the same way, that it's hard to really commit yourself to 2. But certainly some people do that. So it's always an option if you want to accelerate your learning. Guy touched on the ESG elements a little bit earlier, and I wanted to touch on it too, because the business school actually did a survey of what students were interested in. And, I voted in the survey, and ESG was one of the topics that I voted on that I was interested in. And I think a lot of students must have done the same thing, because now there's a new sustainable finance course, and we can see those ESG themes popping up in a lot of the different subjects. So it's really great that the business school, listened to student feedback and was able to incorporate that in what they offer. The other thing I wanted to mention was that, if you're a female looking to go into this course, my experience has been that most of the subjects, there are more men than women, with the exception of sustainable finance, when I think there was more women than men. So that was a fun turn of events. But I've always felt, my opinions have been equally well respected as any man in the class, and it's never been an issue, working with men. So not something to be concerned about if that was one of your worries. And in terms of my tips for success, I would say the biggest things are to make sure that you have a support network in place. During the masters, I had a baby, so, I have family commitments, but my husband's very supportive and, will take on those caring arrangements when we have block classes over the weekend, or if I have to work hard on an assignment, he's there being able to step up. And I'd say it's also important to share, with your work, because there's always an opportunity with your workplace that they might offer financial support for the course, or potentially they can offer you study days or, days off to support you when you're doing your assignments or exams. And it's really important, those extra days can make the difference sometimes. I also wanted to touch on the time management aspect of it. I think with my undergraduate, I was just the worst person for leaving stuff to the last minute. And I think when you're working too, it's hard to predict sometimes when you're going to get busy at work. So in terms of time management, it's always best to start early and to try and keep on top of the readings, because it's very difficult to catch up if you fall behind, particularly, when you have other commitments such as work or family. And the third thing I wanted to touch on was utilizing the forums and, building networks with your fellow students. A lot of the subjects I've been in, they've formed a student WhatsApp group. So there's an informal way for the students to connect or ask for guidance on different topics or different questions in the assignments, to have someone point you in the right direction. And obviously the forums are available to do that too, if you want to get support from your lecturers. I would say that if you do need help, it's always best to ask, because all the lecturers I've had have been willing to put in the extra time to help students where they need it. And if there is something that you're working on and you think you'll miss the deadline for whatever reason, they do have a policy in place where you can apply for special consideration, which I found is, a very fair and reasonable process. So if you do need that, it's available, and I just suggest that you apply early rather than leaving it to the last minute. So yeah, I think that was covering all the things that I wanted to share. I have been really happy with my choice doing the Masters of Applied Finance. I know it's well thought of in the industry, and it's been a great learning experience. There's certainly people across my company who are alumni of the program, and it's really great them knowing that I'm studying this quality course that they're familiar with. It's been great for my brand in the business. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Just one question, Kate. How far off are you from completing?
Just this one subject this term and one subject next term, and hopefully that will be it for me. But I have left the most difficult subjects to last, so you know.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Very useful. Thank you very much indeed, Kate. So now let us move on, and we're going to turn to our second guest speaker, James. James has studied Master of Applied Finance. He, as you can see from the slide, he's a director in NAB, and he's also a lecturer on the Master of Applied Finance. So, James, I'll leave you to do any further introductions, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Guy. Okay, so I did my master's back in 1990-91, so a lifetime ago, I suppose. I sort of want to channel someone I've worked with, a guy called Ken Henry, who I think in 2007-8, when he was Treasury Secretary, said, "Go early, go hard," and that was in relation to the stimulus that the Rudd government was putting into the economy, and I think that's what I did. I was the ripe old age of about 25 when I started doing my masters, and I would encourage anybody, to do the masters if you can before you have family commitments, because it does really slow you down. And I was able to complete it in 2 years, over 1990-91. It was really good to get that done quickly. The sort of things that I took away from the master's program back then, and I don't think it's changed. Critical thinking is one key area that I think the course does encourage you to engage in, and certainly in the course that I teach, it's a big component of what we do. The other thing that Kate mentioned, and I think something that I'm very keen on fostering in the groups that I teach, is networking. And what I'll do is we'll have particular group work where everybody gets together. We're on Zoom typically, and we'll put people into breakout rooms, and they'll work together to prepare a presentation on a particular topic, which they'll then as a group deliver back to the main class at the end of the weekend. So that's been really very valuable in building the networking. Another aspect, I think, as Kate alluded to, is the way that we're doing assessment now is generally there's no closed book exams. So in the particular course that I teach, which is sustainable finance, we'll have a class participation mark, which is broadly around what questions you ask, what contributions you make, and a singular research project that I'd hand out to people. Then we have an assignment, which is only worth 20%, and a final exam, which is worth only 20%. And so the balance of the marks, the other 40%, will come about through a Viva, which is a conversation with me as the lecturer, and through the weekend work that you're doing to present back to the class. And so that makes it very hard for you to fail, I've got to say, because with so many points of assessment, you get a very much more smooth outcome. So you might excel at one thing and you might not do so well, but the thing that you might be not doing so well in would only ever be worth 20 marks. And so the things that you do well in, they largely offset those things. So yeah, it's really interesting the way that assessment has evolved. And I think with ChatGPT, assessment's going to evolve yet again. So I think watch this space is the way I would describe the evolution of assessment. So I think that's going to be really interesting. I think another thing that I'd sort of echo is the isolation of doing some sort of course, which is just coursework that you're reading and then answering questions on. I find that incredibly isolating. So my preference would always be to do something which was based around work with other people. And I think that the Macquarie course does that, both back in the 90s when I did it, but also today, when we're running the course. And just, just thinking about the journey that I had from completing my master's in 1991. Shortly thereafter, I did, in the mid-90s, I did some marking for one of the lecturers that I had particularly got on well with. And then in 2009, I actually started lecturing in the Debt Capital Markets program, which ran until, I think, 2021. And since 2022, we've sort of evolved that course, and it's now Sustainable Finance. So I think that's really the main things that I wanted to cover. But Guy, I'm very happy to take questions from anybody about particular aspects of the experience. I'm not sure that my experience in the early 90s has any reference to the courses are completely different today to what they were back then.
So maybe James, thank you very much indeed for that. That was really useful. What I think I'd do, why don't I take it through, there's a few other points that I want to cover off, and then James, if you could stay with Kate towards the end, and we'll just do a Q&A at the end of the session, and hopefully we can pick up any outstanding questions. We've got quite a few Q&A already coming through, which I've answered a few of them. But let me just move on now to answer, I think, some of the questions that are coming through are talking about what to expect. So let me try and see how well I can cover that off. So in general, what you should expect, and hopefully is coming across, is it's interactive. Off campus is an opportunity that we provide. So if you're working and you need the flexibility, then absolutely you can study off campus, and we do put on networking opportunities. It is work friendly, and you should expect that it's all about applied finance. In terms of the study pathway, sorry, this is a very busy slide, but if you start from the left-hand side, you should see 4 blocks under the heading of foundation. So if you come in and you want to do the graduate certificate, that's these 4 blocks to the left-hand side. So finance principles, quantitative and economic analysis, financial statement analysis, modeling, and case studies. So that's the foundation. Now, it may well be, if you've got prior experience, that you can apply for recognition of prior learning. And that simply means that you need to show that you've got the necessary experience and you have met the learning outcomes for each of those units by some other means. As I said earlier, though, please don't rush this. This is not a race, and in many ways, doing the finance units again with industry experts will perhaps give you another angle that you perhaps wouldn't have had previously. So that's the foundation units. We call them the 6,000. Then we have the core, which are basically those that are listed here. Now, if you were doing the graduate diploma, you'd do the top 3 and then 1 elective. If you're doing the Master of Applied Finance, you'd do these 4 and then you choose 4. So we often refer to these as credit points. So the foundation is 10, each block is 10 credit points. So your foundation is 40 credit points. And some people can get an RPL of 40 credit points. So that means the whole study is 120 credit points. So if you get an RPL of 40, it means you've got 80 left to study. And so if you're doing Master of Applied Finance, I'm not talking about graduate diploma here, but if you were doing the Master of Applied Finance, you'd get the 40 from the core essential, and then you'd get another 4 from the 40 from these one of these 4 of these electives that you've got here: sustainable finance that James just spoke about, and vast investment management, and so on. One question I was asked, though, was in terms of the sequence in which to take them. So there are some units that we call them units. So each block is called a unit. Some units have a prereq. So business valuation has a prereq. That means you need to have done financial structure and insights first. So in some situations, though, you can do the electives before the essentials. So we're not too it's not too set upon, in terms of the order you go. If we go back to the foundation, you will find that some people, most people would think you'd start off with finance principles, but not everybody starts off with finance principles. So depending on when you want to start, typically a unit is offered twice in a year. So if you've got 4 terms in a year, and if you're picking a term to start and a finance principles is not offered in that term, it's in the next term, you might then choose to do another unit. And so as long as there's no prereqs, there's not a set order, but you need to get the foundations done before you then go on to core. But once you've got onto core, you can then mix and match, as I said, subject to the prereqs. So we do try and make it very clear where you would need to have done a previous unit so that you can be successful. Anyway, we can come back to this. It's quite a busy slide, but that's the study pathway. We have flexibility in, if you're studying Master of Applied Finance, you can go part-time or full-time. I would echo Kate's comments that we do have people who start off with thinking, well, yeah, I'm going to go full-time. I'm going to basically do 2 units, even though I'm working. That becomes a real problem. Many people struggle and they say, really, I can't do 2 units in a term and work full-time. So do be careful about that. We won't police you on that. If you want to put your hand up and say, I want to do what we'd call overloading, then you can do that. You can complete in as little as 1.5 years. So then graduate diploma and graduate certificate. So we have those courses within the Master of Applied Finance. And as I said earlier, they can be tailored to your needs. If you look at sort of how a 80 credit point study example could play out, you would have perhaps your recognition of prior learning for the 6,000 units, the 4 that I mentioned earlier on. So you could do term 1, you could do a unit. So this is if you're doing part-time study. You could then do financial structure, then you could come on to risk management, and then you could move on to these electives. Now, you don't need to do it in that order. A lot of people do tend to try and look at what their own strengths are. And you heard from Kate, she sort of had an approach where she looked at what she felt was a more difficult subjects, and she thought, okay, well, maybe I'll put those towards the end. But different people have different approaches. But then typically the one that I would recommend leaving to the last is contemporary issues in applied finance, and that is a core unit, and it's a capstone unit, and it's kind of useful because it brings together, you'll be basically doing a project and you're bringing together a whole range, whole strands of your various learning from other units. So I would recommend that contemporary issues is one that you'd leave to the last. In terms of what a week could look like, our weeks, a term is 10 weeks, and you'd start off with perhaps week 1. Before week 1, we would hopefully have material out to you, so you can, not hopefully, we will definitely have material out so you can do orientation. You can start to be briefed. If you haven't had skills in research, we have available from our librarian staff. They will take you through FactSet and all the other research databases that we have available. Then you'd have a week 1 could be a quiz, a tutorial, and activities. So a class is, typically we would have weekly tutorials. Now, in terms of flexibility, those classes are typically not mandatory. They're going to get a lot more out of them, but they're more about application and asking questions. You'll be meeting with an industry expert talking about the topics that are being covered that week. Week 2 could be a similar sort of activity, but you'd have a guest speaker in. Week 3, quiz and tutorials. We're very keen on quizzes, especially working in groups. I kind of encourage working in groups, doing quizzes where you're trying to get as a group agreement about the quiz response. Week 4 could be a guest speaker. Then we often have a week 5. So this is illustrative. So, but not every subject suits itself to this tempo, but this is a typical kind of flow. Week 5 would be a weekend block. In that situation, quite often the lecturer is trying to apply the material that they've talked to in the weeks preceding. It would be a Saturday and Sunday from 10 till 12 for the break, and then 2 till 4 is typically the time you're looking at, there's an assessment coming in. Then weeks 6 and 7, we have a familiar flow again, and then we have another block weekend. So following through the sort of 10 to 12 and 2 to 4, and then week 9 and 10, and then we'd have a final assessment. So this is just an illustrative week, but that sort of gives you a feel for what a class, what a unit would look like. And the key thing here is that you're not just left on your own. As Kate was saying, one of the things here is you're not on your own. You're with a group of other people. You're interacting, you're engaging, and you're working with material which is kind of very contemporary and relevant. So that's what a week would look like across a term. And just sort of bringing sort of things to, this is sort of the end of my sort of piece before we open it up to Q&A. So we've got this link here for, if you wish to apply online. Term 2 commences 3rd of April, so now is a good time to start making a move. There will be, at the end of this, we will send out to people who've registered for the event, we will send out a recording of this session, as well as an invitation if you want to book if you want to have a one-to-one phone consultation. By all means, that can be done, and I'd be more than happy to talk with people about their interests. But maybe some very specific questions which we may have to try and, if you're wanting to ask questions about, would I get RPLs for certain things, recognition of prior learning, those are the sort of things we wouldn't just give an off-the-cuff response. We would need to look at specifics of what your transcript would look like. So we will be able to answer some things, but we certainly could give you guidance on how to progress from there. So that is what I wanted to cover. Kate and James, I wonder if I could invite you to switch your cameras back on again, and see if we see what questions we've got. I think there's a good question here for you, Kate, if I may, and it's from Rhys Johnson. Thanks, Rhys, for your question. It says, "Hi, Guy. Hope you're well. I'm currently working full-time, just confirming that this can be completed via distance learning. It is difficult to make lectures within the 9 to 5 window."
So yes, it can be completed via distance learning. The lectures are typically in the evening. It might be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evening. I've never had a Monday or Friday yet, but I suppose they could be. They're usually 6, maybe 6 till 8, 6:30 to 8:30, that sort of time range. And then there's obviously the weekend block courses, and they might be 10 till 3 or 9 till 3, depending on how much material there is to cover, but definitely suits the working professional.
Great. Thank you for that. James, did you want to comment on that? I wonder whether you just make that, echo my sentiments about what you feel about people who are working and they're trying to do 2 units.
The way I would say it is that, all the lectures are recorded. So if you have a work commitment that you can't get out of, you can always go back and listen to the recording. That's an absolute from my perspective. I think it is really important, though, that you attend when you can attend, because it's really hard to get participation marks if you don't turn up. And particularly in the course that I run, participation for me is just it's one of those things that's about networking. It's about whether it's participation sort of on the weeknights that Kate was talking about, 6 till 8, asking questions, making a contribution if you know something, making an observation if you're that quick, and then on the weekends, I think they're the ones. So I think making sure you're not going to weddings and things like that when courses are scheduled is probably a really good idea. If that has to happen, that has to happen. But it'd be better to sort of, it's what I say, go early, go hard, get these things out of the way. It's really good.
Thanks, James. I think there's a question here from Edward. Does timetabling of face-to-face suit full-time workers, i.e. lectures? I think we've answered that. So hopefully we've covered that one off for you, Edward. One of the things that I also got down here is a question of, in this course, do we have examinations or assignments? How are points calculated in Finance Masters? James, maybe I can give that to you.
Sure. As I said, so the way that I assess, and every lecture is going to be different, but I want as many points of assessment as I can get, and we're not really putting more than 20 marks into any point of assessment. So a written assignment, and of course, all these things go through Turnitin. So, the lecturers are looking at your answer and they're knowing, has this been submitted before, or how much of it is representing quotes and things like that. So that's useful. And look, there's nothing wrong with quoting somebody as long as you're not answering a question which says in your own words. So I have had a student put 57% of quoted materials into an essay which was asking in his own words, and clearly that's not in his own words. But these sorts of things happen, and that's not a fail. That's just a pass answer. But if you reference things properly, then that's great. Your participation to me is key, and that's the individual research projects which we introduced late last year. There's the group work that you do. There's your actual turning up and engaging at the class. They're the way that you get marks in my class. And as I say, having so many points of assessment means it is very hard to fail. I've only had one student fail the Masters of Applied Finance, Sustainable Finance the subject, and that was somebody who didn't turn up at all. And so they were unfamiliar with the context of the course. They were able to, access the information and listen to the recordings, but it just wasn't enough. And when you don't turn up, as I say, you miss out on those opportunities to get those group work marks. And that means that you're effectively putting yourself, it means you've got to get 50 out of 60 marks to get through. So I would say that it's something where you do have to turn up. As I say, if you can't for one or two sessions, that's not the end of the world. But it is a course that requires you to put an effort in, and that is to my mind why you're doing the course, unless you're going to be built. Do you want to build your network? Yeah, well, you need to turn up and meet the other people. And Kate, you did the Sustainable Finance course last year. I'd just sort of throw back to you about how you felt about the opportunities to network with the other students. Was that valuable for you?
It definitely was, because I felt in my cohort when we did the Sustainable Finance class, there was such a range of people who had really great experience with different aspects of sustainable finance. So it was really good to, hear different industry perspectives from them and their jobs. And it definitely added to the learning experience.
And it's interesting because the group work that I'm doing on the weekends is based on an assessment task for selection to work at NAB. So that's really interesting. To take something from industry where we're giving people a task, saying, okay, solve this problem, and it's one of the selection criteria. If you get through the various tests that they give you to work out that you're a reasonable human being, and then get through a screening interview, then you get to do these sort of exercises when you go to work at a large institution. And being able to do those well and lead is often the screen that gets you into an organisation.
Great, thanks for that. James, I think I've got one more. I've got a question here for you, James, and then I've got another question after that for Kate. So I'll start off with your question, James. Do you have guest speakers from industry across all units? How often do we have them in classes? So I guess more, I was thinking more to do with sustainable finance. Could you just tell us a bit about your approach on guest speakers?
I have guest speakers from everywhere. So we had last year, unfortunately not in Kate's class, but we had Davina Rooney, who's the CEO of Green Building Council, come to talk to us about green buildings. We had one of the, so on ESG and equity, we had a guest speaker. And quite a few guest speakers. In Kate's group, we had the guys who came from, you have to remind me, Kate, I think, was it the guys that they did a prefab Australia, it was. So they did all the prefabrication, and they talked about doing how to build prefabricated houses, prefabricated buildings. Just amazing sort of technology that's coming out in sustainability more broadly, that you would then need to finance. So yeah, and thinking about, you know, often the people in ESG and equity, they're like, oh, you know, property, or we don't like that, you know. But you know, 40% of our emissions come from the places we live and the places we work, and so it's really incumbent upon us when we're doing finance to make sure that we're financing buildings that have got lower carbon emissions. So last year, for instance, and this is not just my academic expertise or interest, I actually do this for a job. So we did a transaction for the new Park Life Metro, which is the new railway station to the airport. And that transaction, the builder, which is Plenary Group, have agreed to work towards a 20% reduction in embedded carbon in the building of this rail network, which is fantastic. You know, this is the sort of stuff that needs to be done if we're going to get to net zero by 2050. And you know, there's so much going on in that space, and it's as I say, so much going on. There's so many people out there who know things. So I'm absolutely keen to get people in. We get Olivia Rosewell is a member of our team at NAB, and I get her to come in and talk about carbon markets, which is a particular interest and expertise of hers. So, you know, that's a sort of, you know, I don't pretend to know everything, and, you know, where I know somebody has a great deal of knowledge to share, we'll definitely get those people in to talk about those particular topics.
Right. Well, I'm told I've got time for one more question, but I might squeeze two more in if I'm very naughty, depending on how long Kate needs to answer this question. If a person didn't get any recognition of prior learning and they were studying one subject at a time, how long would a master's take to finish?
Is that a question for me?
Yep.
I think we covered that off in the presentation already, but in case it wasn't clear, it would take 3 years to do, one per term, 4 terms a year. That's
what I thought was. Thank you for repeating that. And the final question that we've got time for, and there are some questions which I haven't been able to answer, but the question was interested in on your thoughts on why Macquarie Masters over Kaplan applied finance courses. Now, I have to start by saying I can't comment on Kaplan. I don't know enough about them. The only thing I can say is that what we pride ourselves on, and you might want to check on any other provider, is we provide industry experts. You're not thrown on your own to do stuff on your own. You're in a community. You're with industry experts, with a network of people, and we have a passion. Our passion is not just building sort of a course that we say hello and goodbye. It's a passion about creating like-minded people who want to grow. And as we see from James, you know, we welcome James in, and he sort of came through the course. He's now in industry, and he's also coming and giving back, and that's a great thing that we enjoy. So I think, you know, if you're looking at other alternatives, I guess the only thing I can do is to emphasize what I think hopefully has come through tonight, which is we do focus on industry experts, applied finance, and a view of critical thinking, and giving you those skills to be a valued member and successful, not for just today's challenged skill sets, but also for lifelong learning. So I think that basically brings us to the end of this evening. Thank you very much indeed for everybody. Thank you, Kate and James. A really inspiring session, and do look out for the email through to you for people who've attended. So thank you very much indeed for sticking with us. We look forward to providing you further information in your consideration of how you wish to progress your careers. So with that, thank you very much indeed, and have a great evening, and we look forward to working with you in the future.